Steam Base Builder Festival is on now until the penultimate day of January, and with it, a variety of games are on special, not just core strategy games, but also base building experiences, the survival multiplayer kind, and everything that you can imagine in between. These are probably the best Steam deals so far into this infantile new year, and so here are my top 20 quick picks for the Steam Base Builder Festival of 2023. And first up, at 20% off, is the Dyson Sphere program, a game we've not yet talked about here on the channel and is honestly probably best described by its Steam reviews. Known as Expletive, the game, be careful, it will wipe hours of your day. or perhaps you prefer this one, which I quite like. You take Factorio, add 2 gigabytes worth of mods, make it 3D, and run it through Google Translate, and you get this. Still in its early stages and expanding out to other planets. That user is in for a treat. But more broadly and seriously, this game delivers a Factorio-like experience, a base builder with an ultimate goal, but this one in a 3D world, a more immersive, relaxing and colourful environment, and I think it's a game worthy of the first slot in this video. I'd also like to include some new stuff in this one, some fresh games, whether they're the best or mostly positive, and that's where this one fits in. At 10% off, Surviving the Abyss, releasing only a few days ago, is a more hardcore, exploitative, exploration-based city builder. The setting, if you're curious, is Earth, 1976. The Cold War's in full swing, and we've been directed to develop a deep-sea research facility to work on human cloning. The background, I think, for this game is really fun. Some of the Steam reviews, while I can't quite make a video out of them like I could with that last game. Man, I could do a whole series reviewing hilarious ones like that. Have hinted at some bugginess around the edges with this game and its forums, but I think it's one to watch. It seems like a unique take. And how about you take this 3 years worth of development behind it at 20% off? This is Valheim. Valheim is a game about exploration and survival. It's best, I think, played in co-op. However, you can play it alone, 1 to 10 players, ultimately set in a procedurally generated world. A world where you will fight to survive, but also, as you can see, it's one based around Norse mythology as well. So there's kind of a little bit of that fantastical make-believe element to it as well. However, grounded in crafting, whether that's weapons, long houses, boats, it's all about surviving and thriving. The environments themselves are fun, and as you can see by this trailer, the updates that the developers have been giving this game are becoming more and more fantastical every single one. Valheim, highly worth checking out. Also highly worth checking out, and at 20% off, is Rimworld, a game I have finally picked up myself somewhat recently, played over the holidays, and thoroughly enjoyed doing so. I ended up buying it twice for a different system. That's a completely separate story, but what you need to know about Rimworld is it really does deserve its positive reviews and its strong holding to its core price. You might think 20% off is not a discount worth getting out of bed for. I would tell you otherwise. It's basically the best we've seen for this colony simulator base building survival game that's really about you building a story with characters from people who may very well have paid for the in-game name pack. It's only an extra $20 or so, and you too can become one of these characters inside of people's games. They're able to build real stories, and the stories that are generated by them and the world around them are based around all sorts of really interesting overarching themes, from in-game combat and diplomacy to dealing with the dynamic environments and biomes around you, or relationships and trade between the characters. It is both the gripping gameplay, the building of a world inside of Rimworld, as well as those relationships that really set this apart from many other base building experiences. Despite the 2D graphical style, it's well worth a go. And speaking of well worth a go, this, my friends, is City Skylines. A game that probably, to be fair, doesn't really need to be introduced to a lot of you. It's 70% off, and like most of the things inside of Paradox's sort of wider, generally reviewed at either mostly positive or better collection of strategy games, it doesn't fail to disappoint if you're in the genre or in the market. In this case, of course, you're looking at a city builder, one that I still stand by probably being the best of its kind. It's many years old now, City Skylines, but it continues to receive updates like most things on this list, and if you haven't already picked it up, it is a fantastic, not just city building, but also broader simulation and management game, providing you don't mind pulling almost all of your hair out dealing with traffic. It does, as I mentioned earlier, continue to receive free as well as many paid updates, and there's a huge modding scene behind it too. Well worth picking up if you haven't already. Moving along to the next item on my list, and if you haven't already picked it up, it's well worth doing so, is probably the best descriptor for Age of Empires 2, the definitive edition. At 65% off, that's almost 2/3 of the price down for this remastering of probably the best Age of Empires game ever made, dare I say. I think most of the community would back me in that. Although, of course, more recent entries, also on special, could be worth checking out during the Base Building Steam Festival for 2023. But it goes without saying, if you're looking for a real-time strategy game that incorporates some base building, you can play it alone or with friends. It's a classical style and a brilliant strategy game at its core, and for about $7, Age of Empires 2 Definitive could be yours. What could also be yours for a slightly higher price point, but it is worth picking up, Satisfactory. At 40% off, coming in at around $20 US, Satisfactory delivers, again, an outstanding multiplayer experience to this list. However, Satisfactory brings a very different package than most other things here. Satisfactory is a first-person factory building game, and it delivers that first-person perspective, I would say, probably better than anything else inside of this video. It's about base building, it's about striving for automation and crafting, but it also delivers a really interesting open world. Definitely a living open world, and like a lot of the other things on this list, of course, it's an open world that can be explored with friends or alone. I've had a lot of fun both in multiplayer but also in single player inside of Satisfactory. 40% off is a really brilliant discount for this kind of game, so it's well worth picking up from that perspective as well. And finally, the final thing that I'd sort of mention that Satisfactory brings that perhaps others don't is that mechanized level of customization. Customizing your factory, the industry, and the vehicles behind it to a level that few others bring. Satisfactory also delivers a really smooth experience now. Like other titles on the list, of course, this one has received many updates, and they've generally been fantastic. It's one that I continue to follow in the background, and not so much here on the channel, but it's definitely worth your time picking up. I mean, just look at it. It is brilliant. Moving along to another brilliant game on the list, this one by Shadow Games, a publisher we'll return to slightly later in the video as well, is Northguard, and it's 70% off. Northguard is a fantastic city building, settlement, survival game. It's about real-time strategy, it's about management and exploration. If you're unfamiliar with it, basically, you build a new settlement in a world, assign your workers to various jobs, of course you manage the resources, and crucially here, survive those really harsh winters. To survive into new neighbouring territories, conquering them for the resources, coming up against the enemies, and ultimately striving towards a crucial victory condition: conquest, fame, trade. The game delivers a really wide variety of experiences inside of a somewhat small, but don't be put off by its size or its cutesy look package, because man, Northguard is a truly brilliant game. Some of the recent DLC has received mixed reviews, and I haven't personally tried it myself, but Northguard as a real-time strategy city building experience is brilliant. The next entry on my list, as you can see, still looking a little frosty at 75% off, is Frostpunk. Frostpunk, of course, taking its name from its art style, in fact, both parts of its name, both the frost and the punk from the cyberpunk, comes a city-building survival game set in a post-apocalyptic kind of last city on Earth setting. The reason why Frostpunk is here isn't just because it's a very positively reviewed city-building game, one of the few that actually really nails the post-apocalyptic setting, but also because Frostpunk 2 is one of my most anticipated, personally, kind of city-building strategy games for 2023. And so, at 75% off, I will continue to say, now is a brilliant time to pick up Frostpunk if you'd like to explore its world a little bit before Frostpunk 2 comes out later this year. And in the spirit of continuing to receive updates, the next item on my list, here it is. It's Prison Architect at 75% off. I love Prison Architect for some of the same reasons why I love Rimworld's approach to the way that you build inside of this sandbox strategy game. Again, Prison Architect, much like Rimworld, is about telling a story and developing a world around the prisoners. You rule, if I can say that, as warden over one of the world's most ruthless, or potentially less harmful, prisons, in which you can build to contain the inmates, design and develop a prison around your policies, your architectural design, and everything else that could go within it. The DLC and updates for this game continue to improve it, and I'm a big fan. At 75% off, it's an easy recommendation for me in this video. Similarly, Timberborn, although with a slightly more early access flair. At 20% off, Timberborn is a very positively reviewed city-building, more colony sim style game. It also has a focus on survival, although not quite perhaps as gritty and hardcore as some of the other titles that I've already reviewed in this video. Timberborn, of course, brings something a little different in that it brings beaver societies in which you'll choose to either be nature-friendly or the industrious Iron Teeth ones, each faction bringing a slightly different playstyle. The world itself and the building elements, the player experience is really satisfying to use, and the slightly dynamic world, bringing wet and dry seasons, and elements, as you can see, for us to build and control it slightly around us with things like river control and resource management. Ultimately, at its core, Timberborn is a fantastic city-building game. However, if you're after something a little bit more peaceful, slower pace, but just as beautiful, if not more so, and enjoyable, Dorfromantik at 30% off might be for you. It's received overwhelmingly positive reviews over its lifetime on Steam, and rightly so. This is our first and really corely focused puzzle entry into the list, combining a puzzling element with simulation and of course city building elements where you see the way that you place the tiles interlocking into what is both a really colourful, beautiful and relaxing world. Dorfromantik is all about completing that puzzle, about growing that village, about finding the next piece of procedurally generated stacked tiles one after the other to build a beautiful world in combination with everything else that you've pulled together, from forests to villages to water biomes. It is, of course, a slight change of pace from most other things here, and a wonderful one at that. Returning back to Shadow Games, as I mentioned earlier, here we have a game that I've sunk a lot of time into. This is Dune Spice Wars. It's another early access release on this list, but it's one that I fairly confidently put here and say, hey everybody, this is a good game. Dune Spice Wars is a real-time strategy game, set of course in the Dune world. However, if like me, you're sitting there thinking, can I play this game not knowing much about Dune? The answer is yes, and I can tell you because I did it myself, knowing nothing going into it, except for the fact that I liked real-time strategy games. Dune Spice Wars, even in early access, hasn't disappointed me. The developers continue to roll out really massive updates as part of their update framework, something I know many of you have asked me to cover, and I will be returning at least to cover the update progress of Dune Spice Wars in a future video, so do subscribe, please, for that one, if you haven't already. Dune Spice Wars delivers economic management, diplomacy, political management and intrigue, as well as a little bit of base building and exploration to the real-time strategy genre, and it's a game that I will wholeheartedly continue to recommend. Moving along into one that has a strong legacy. This is Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress released at the very end of 2022 on Steam and is 10% off. Not much, but I think it will have that Rimworld effect, if that makes sense. Popular game, strong legacy, a die-hard group of fans, and a reasonably strong price point. Or at least, that's what we've seen so far. It is, after all, a new release on Steam, but a legacy title. This is a colony sim with, of course, indie pixel graphics. It's a notorious simulation game, but for all the right reasons. Dwarf Fortress is one of the deepest, most intricate simulation games, so do be prepared to step into a learning experience. Moving into my next title, another early access one actually. This is Against the Storm, and it's another early access game that at 20% off, I can again absolutely recommend. This one coming from Hooded Horse, an indie publisher. They also publish some other great things, so it could be worth looking at their broader catalogue. Against the Storm is a strategy city builder game that crucially, and unlike anything else on this list, incorporates roguelike elements into not only how you develop your city, but how you develop the people, the citizens or workers within it, the kind of buildings or techs that you might lean into or upgrade, the kind of recipes that you might be farming resources to develop and then sell on. And then, of course, there's the wider world. As the Queen's Viceroy, you're leading these humans and beavers, lizards and harpies to develop a civilization. But not just that, a chain of cities stretching out across an ever-changing world. Against the Storm is a game that pulls you back with replayability. And it really does a brilliant job at interlocking roguelite elements with city building at every level. As I say, it's not just at the individual level. Is a worker a human who prefers to eat this, or a lizard who prefers to live here? Those are questions that you have to grapple with and who you'll support, but also at the wider level as you race against the storm to win the support and continue to expand and try and fight off that grave challenge out there. A much more grave challenge out there, though, could be the depths of space, and that's where this one comes in. At 15% off, Ixion claims to be an unrelenting city-building game. And there are a few things, actually, that we really should note about it. The most noteworthy one is probably of its story. Having just recently released on the 8th of December last year, 2022, Ixion brings a story of us set adrift from Earth in a prototype space station as we look for, hopefully, a new world. We're tasked, therefore, with a sort of a twofold challenge. The first is that of balancing preservation and exploration as we look out into what is beyond us. How can we find a new world? How can we settle it and build a city around it? Or around many of them, for example. But then there's another challenge that Ixion brings, and that's managing the infrastructure and resources, and crucially, the relationships and dynamics of the crew within. How do we do all of that to keep humanity alive in the cold dark is the challenge that the space strategy and survival city building game brings. I like its progression system. I like the way that it tries to build a connection between strategy and storytelling, something that a few entries on this list have delivered, but this is the first one that delivers it in a more sort of stepped back traditional strategy approach instead of that sort of top-down 2D city building, the likes of Rimworld or Prison Architect. Ixion is a relatively new title, and one that I haven't put as much time into as I would really like to. In fact, barely any at all. So I won't comment any more on the game playability here, other than to say that it's definitely one that is on my list to watch, and it should rightly and noteworthily make the top 20 list for this sale too. Moving on to the next entry on my list, a game that I have covered here and also on the channel, is Land of the Vikings. Land of the Vikings is an early access release, important to note, but at 15% off, it's a reasonable discount for what is, honestly, I think already a reasonably priced title. It's a colony sim, city builder, set of course in the land of the Vikings. I love its tech tree in particular, its very RPG style. I think that the way it handles resource management is incredibly interesting. The way it connects the land and its resources to the sea is really true to the sort of setting and story that it's trying to build. I also really enjoyed the way it brought the villagers or the workers into this story. Of course, a concept not too unfamiliar from other games, but one really noteworthy, I think, for Land of the Vikings. Moving on, at 25% off, we see Settlement Survival, another city-building colony sim game, but this one with a little bit of a twist. I've been following Settlement Survival since it released in the last quarter of 2022, and at 25% off, I think now seems like a really good time to pick it up if you're looking to pick up a colony sim game, because that is what this does best. Yes, of course, it's a city building title where you'll eventually build up from a small city to a bustling, hopefully unique kind of town, and ultimately never really push too far to that like megalopolis level of development, but that's not really what this game is about. The world that it builds and the art style that it delivers is really satisfying. You can stare at this palette for a long time and not come away from it feeling dreary or depressed, or at least no more so than you did stepping into it, because it builds a bright and wonderful world, presenting a few dynamic challenges through weather events. It's a resource management city builder like no other, although perhaps not as cutesy and glorious as the next entry on our list. This, my friends, at 75% off, is Planet Zoo. And Planet Zoo is obviously more on the simulation management side of things. Yes, we've looked at real-time strategy, many of those. We've looked at colony sims, many of them. This is where the real-time management strategy comes into play. Planet Zoo is of course not alone in being one of the many simulation games on special, but what Planet Zoo delivers is a wonderful world of wildlife to its deluxe edition, and honestly, sometimes I'm really hot on Planet Zoo, other times I'm really cold on it. It's one of those games that I can come into, play 5, 10, 15, 25 hours, and then step away from for 2 years and pretend like it never existed. Not because it's bad, but just because it's one of those ones that scratches an itch and does it so well that I'm left free and able to explore new experiences and then come back to a freshly updated, still as glorious, colourful and exciting simulation management game. It does what The Sims does to me, it does what many other simulation titles can do, and at 75% off, I think it might very well be able to do that for you too. And the final entry on my list may appeal to you if, like me, you're missing out on a tropical getaway or maybe something else because the global economy is dire, inflation is high, and content creation just really doesn't pay well. Tropico 6 might just be for you. At 60% off, Tropico 6, seriously though, does deliver a really enjoyable strategy city building game. Of course, you will probably by now be familiar with the Tropico franchise. It has a rich history. It's not the 6th edition for nothing. And while not quite as strong a legacy as something like Civilization 6, Tropico 6 delivers a more interesting tropical experience. And of course, you're managing kind of 2 economies at once if you want to as well, because this is about you and your dynasty, your family, and you as the dictator of this island as well, as you move through the stages of history, from early to more technologically developed stages, with some colonialism thrown into the mix as well. Will you rule your tropical island with fear or faith? It's entirely up to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully you've found something useful in this video. I'll see you next time, everybody.